The Uxovari Empire had conquered countless worlds, leaving only ashes in their wake. Supreme Commander Varkish stood aboard his flagship, gazing at the blue planet below. Earth, a backwater world of primitive mammals who had dared to resist the Dominion. It was almost insulting. Their fleet, an armada of 1,000 warships, loomed over Earth's atmosphere like an eclipse. Their technology was centuries ahead. Their soldiers, bio-enhanced warriors, had torn through empires far greater than this one. Victory was inevitable. Varkish activated the fleet-wide broadcast. His voice, deep and cold, echoed through every Xovari channel. Commence planetary invasion. Eradicate all resistance. Make them kneel. Drop pods rain down like falling stars. Mechanical walkers, towering like giants, stomped onto Earth's surface, their weapons primed. Fighter crafts roared through the skies, scanning for human resistance. But something was wrong. No enemy forces awaited them. No military convoys. No defensive fire. The cities lay abandoned, their streets eerily silent. Varkish frowned, watching the reports come in. Where are their armies? His second-in-command, General Kovar, growled. They must have fled. They see our strength and surrender without a fight. Varkish wasn't convinced. Something felt off. Then it began. Explosions erupted across their landing zones, not from direct attacks, but from the ground itself. Roads collapsed under their heavy walkers, swallowing them whole. Skyscrapers, rigged with hidden charges, crumbled onto the unsuspecting invaders. Then came the drones, small, almost invisible, equipped with cloaking tech. They slipped through defenses undetected, delivering precision strikes. Xovari dropships burst into flames mid-air. Their supply lines were severed before they could even be established. Panic spread. Their forces were being attacked, but there was no visible enemy. No open battlefield. Just death from the shadows. "Sir," a frantic officer shouted, "we are taking heavy losses. We don't even know where they're attacking from." Varkish clenched his fists. This was not the easy conquest he had imagined. Captain Han Da-hyun crouched behind the remains of an old parking garage, watching the chaos unfold. His visor displayed real-time enemy positions. The Xovari were confused, disoriented. Just as planned. "Ghost Division, move in," he whispered into his comms. A dozen cloaked soldiers darted through the ruins, silent and deadly. Their suits bent light, rendering them nearly invisible. Each one carried railguns capable of piercing Xovari armor in a single shot. Da-hyun took aim at a Xovari officer barking orders. One pull of the trigger. A flash. The officer dropped, his head snapping back. The Xovari turned in confusion. There was nothing there. The ambush had begun. Gunfire erupted from unseen positions. Grenades rolled between enemy lines, detonating in waves of heat and metal. Xovari warriors, bred for direct combat, had never faced an enemy that refused to engage head-on. "Captain," Lieutenant Kim Ji-woo's voice crackled in. "Cyber warfare is in play. Enemy comms are jammed. Feeding them false orders now." On the enemy side, chaos deepened. Some units received orders to retreat. Others were sent into kill zones. Misinformation spread like wildfire. The Xovari, a species that relied on brute force, were falling apart against an enemy they could not see. Da-hyun smiled grimly. Humanity was the underdog in technology. But war wasn't just about weapons. It was about tactics, and the Xovari had never fought like this before. Varkish slammed his fist onto the control panel, his sharp claws leaving dents in the metal. "How is this happening? Where is their army?" General Kovar hesitated. They do not fight like an army. They fight like predators," Varkish finished, realization dawning. The humans had adapted. They knew they could not win in direct battle. So they turned war into something else. A slow, calculated hunt. "Pull back our forces," he ordered. "Regroup and—" A new alarm blared. A bright flash filled the screen. His heart stopped. One of their command ships, a massive battlecruiser, had just exploded, not from a direct assault, but from inside. Human saboteurs had infiltrated it and detonated its core. Their fleet wasn't just under attack. It was being dismantled. Varkish's jaw tightened. He had underestimated these creatures. He wouldn't make that mistake again. The HFY, enraged and desperate, deployed their ultimate weapon, the Annihilator, a war machine the size of a city, piloted by an AI designed to eliminate entire civilizations. Its cannons turned Earth's ruins into molten craters. Its energy shields repelled every attack. It was unstoppable. Or so they thought. Jiwu studied the data, eyes scanning rapidly. It has a relay core inside their command center. If we take that out, we take out the Annihilator. Da-Hyun nodded. Then we get inside. His team infiltrated the enemy base, navigating through tight corridors filled with patrols. They moved like shadows, eliminating guards with swift, silent strikes. As they reached the control room, alarms blared. They were discovered. Hold them off. Da-Hyun shouted, working furiously to disable the relay. Jiwu and the others fought fiercely. HFY soldiers stormed in. It was brutal, close-quarters combat. Blades clashed. Blood stained the metal floors. Then, a fatal shot. Jiwu gasped, clutching his chest. Da-Hyun turned in horror. No. Jiwu smiled weakly. Just finish it. With a final keystroke, the relay shut down. The Annihilator twitched, its systems failing. Then it turned on the HFY. With their war machine now against them, the HFY crumbled. Their soldiers, already terrified, now fled in panic. Humanity launched its final assault. Their drones, their cyber warfare, their sheer willpower, everything came together. Da-Hyun led the charge onto the HFY flagship. It was time to end this. Inside, he found Varkish. The Supreme Commander stood tall, defeated but defiant. You fight like cowards, Varkish spat. Da-Hyun wiped blood from his face. No, we fight to win. With a single shot, it was over. The HFY fleet retreated, shattered. The empire that once conquered worlds now feared a single planet. Da-Hyun stood at a memorial, surrounded by soldiers and civilians. They had won, but at a great cost. Jiwu, Hyunwoo, and countless others had given their lives. He looked up at the sky. We never wanted war. But if you bring it to our home, we will make sure you never leave. Across the galaxy, alien empires listened. And they feared too. The HFY invasion had become a nightmare. Their fleet still hung in Earth's orbit, but the war on the ground was slipping from their grasp. The streets were empty, the cities silent, but death lurked in every shadow. Every patrol they sent out vanished. Every supply line they tried to establish was cut. Their soldiers moved in fear, their once powerful war machines reduced to smoldering wrecks. Captain Han Da-Hyun watched the enemies panic from a sniper's perch in the ruins of an old skyscraper. His advanced visor displayed a HFY squad below, moving in tight formation, their weapons raised. They were terrified, and for good reason. He activated his comms with a whisper. Ghost Division, take positions. 12 figures moved through the ruins like wraiths. Their cloaking suits bent light and sound, making them nearly invisible. Even the advanced sensors of the HFY couldn't detect them. These soldiers weren't just ghosts. They were hunters. Da-Hyun lined up his shot. A HFY officer barked orders, his voice shaking. Da-Hyun's finger tightened on the trigger. A flash. The officer's head snapped back, and his body crumpled. Panic erupted. The HFY spun, firing wildly into the ruins, but there was nothing to see. No enemy to fight, just shadows and death. Move in, Da-Hyun commanded. The Ghost Division struck with brutal efficiency. Railgun shots pierced armor. EMP grenades shorted out their advanced tech, and AI-guided drones swept in with surgical precision. Within moments, the HFY squad lay in silence. Area clear. Ji-Woo's voice crackled in his ear. I'm feeding the enemy false data. They're sending reinforcements into an ambush zone. Da-hyun smiled grimly. Let's welcome them. The war had become a hunt, and humanity was winning. On the HFY flagship, Supreme Commander Varkish stood in the command center, his claws digging into the metal railing as reports poured in. Losses, ambushes, sabotage. His forces were unraveling, not from superior firepower, but from fear. Sir, General Kovar said, his voice trembling, our soldiers refuse to move. They say the humans are everywhere. Varkish's eyes burned with fury. They are cowards. They hide because they know they cannot face us directly. But even as he spoke, doubt crept in. These humans weren't fighting a conventional war. They struck from the shadows, turned their own tech against them, and disappeared before they could retaliate. Even their communications were compromised. False orders led their forces into death traps. Their own ships fired on each other, believing them to be infiltrated. Find their command center. Varkish roared. We end this now. But no matter how many scouts they sent, the humans remained ghosts. In an underground bunker, Lieutenant Kim Ji-Woo worked tirelessly. Screens filled the room, showing hacked enemy communications and false data streams. Her fingers danced across the keyboard, manipulating troop movements, feeding disinformation. Enemy reinforcements are heading to Zone 7, she said, her voice calm despite the chaos. I've rerouted their supply convoys into a minefield. Beside her, AI systems monitored the battlefield, predicting HFY movements and adjusting their strategies. The HFY's technological superiority meant nothing when they couldn't trust their own systems. Ghost Division, Ji-Woo called. We have a target. Enemy command post, lightly guarded. Take it out. On our way, Da-hyun replied. The Ghost Division moved through the ruins like shadows. Cloaked and silent, they reached the enemy command post unnoticed. Da-hyun signaled his team, and they spread out, taking positions. He fired the first shot, and chaos followed. EMP grenades rained down, disabling defenses. Railgun fire cut down guards. Within minutes, the post was theirs. Da-hyun accessed the enemy systems, feeding the data back to Ji-Woo. We've got their deployment plans. Good, Ji-Woo said. Let's make them dance. The HFY forces fell deeper into chaos. False orders sent them into ambushes. Their supply lines collapsed. Fear spread like wildfire. On the flagship, Varkish watched his empires might crumble. We underestimated them, he whispered. But it was too late. The Shadow War had already been won. The HFY believed they had finally found the humans' main base. From their command vessel in orbit, they prepared for a devastating orbital bombardment. Supreme Commander Varkish stood with cold satisfaction as his officers fed targeting data into their weapon systems. Fire, he ordered. The sky over Earth burned. Missiles and plasma beams rained down, reducing entire city blocks to molten craters. The ground shook with explosions, and towering clouds of fire and ash rose into the atmosphere. The HFY thought they were delivering a killing blow, but they had no idea they were wasting their most powerful arsenal on an empty decoy. In a hidden command center miles away, Lieutenant Kim Ji-Woo watched the destruction unfold on her monitors. They took the bait, she said, her voice steady but cold. Confirming 0 casualties, one of the techs reported. The area was fully evacuated. Good. Ji-Woo's fingers flew across her keyboard. Let's make them pay for their arrogance. She activated a missile strike already locked onto the HFY's command vessel. From hidden silos buried deep beneath the earth, a swarm of human missiles launched into the atmosphere. They broke through the HFY's defenses before their ships could react. Explosions tore through the flagship's hull, sending debris and flames into the void. The command vessel listed to one side, crippled. On the ground, Captain Han Da-hyun led his team through the smoldering ruins of a battlefield. The air was thick with smoke and the scent of burning metal. The Stories' ground forces were in disarray, their communications shattered, their command structure in chaos. "Check for survivors," Da-hyun ordered, his voice tense. The Ghost Division moved swiftly, scanning the rubble and pulling out human soldiers where they could. Medics worked quickly, stabilizing the wounded. They moved together, the room erupting into chaos. Plasma fire rained down on them, and Da-hyun's rifle overheated as he laid down suppressing fire. Ji-woo ran toward the relay, planting charges with practiced efficiency. A bolt of energy seared across her side, and she stumbled. Da-hyun was at her side in an instant, dragging her behind cover. "Go," she gasped. "Finish it." But he wouldn't leave her. Not her. "I'll cover you," she whispered, her hand pressing the detonator into his. "Go." He went. The last charge clicked into place, and as he turned back, he saw Ji-woo step out of cover, drawing fire away from him. She stood defiant, her weapon blazing. Then the room exploded. The relay went dark, and the annihilator froze mid-step. Then, with its controls severed, it turned its weapons on the Storie forces. Plasma cannons and missile pods unleashed hell, and the invaders' army fell into chaos. Da-hyun's heart broke as he watched the fire consume the command base behind him. Ji-woo's voice was gone from the comms, but her sacrifice had given humanity a fighting chance. 5. The battlefield above Earth was a vision of fire and ruin. Explosions bloomed in the cold void, and the wreckage of Storie ships drifted like burning tombstones. The annihilator had turned on its own forces, and the Storie's once unbreakable formation fell into chaos. It was the perfect moment to strike. Da-hyun's voice rang out over the comms. "All units, this is our chance. Hit them with everything you've got." Human ships surged forward. They were smaller and older, outmatched in firepower and technology. But they had something that Storie didn't: desperation, ingenuity, a will to survive. Cloaked drones swarmed through the enemy's ranks, planting magnetic charges on their hulls. Missiles streaked through space, striking true as Storie defenses crumbled. Human pilots pulled off maneuvers no ag could predict, dancing through enemy fire with reckless precision. On the bridge of his command ship, Da-hyun watched it unfold with grim satisfaction. But he knew the battle wasn't won yet. The Storie flagship, a massive war vessel bristling with weapons, was trying to retreat. If it escaped, they'd regroup and return stronger. "We can't let them get away," he said. "Prepare for boarding." The Ghost Division's dropship launched toward the flagship, weaving through the chaos. Flak cannons spat fire, but the pilot dodged them with practiced ease. The ship slammed into the Storie hull, and the airlock hissed open. "Move," Da-hyun ordered, leading his team into the enemy's heart. The corridors were a nightmare. Storie soldiers fought with brutal efficiency, but the humans were faster and more determined. Plasma fire lit up the walls as Da-hyun's rifle barked in reply. So-min fought at his side, her face streaked with blood, eyes blazing with fury. They pushed forward, leaving a trail of fallen enemies behind them. Da-hyun's focus was absolute. He had one goal: reach Varkish, end this war. At the doors to the command chamber, they hit resistance. Enhanced Storie guards stood in their way, massive and heavily armored. The fight was brutal. So-min fell, her body crumpling as a plasma bolt struck her. Rage fueled Da-hyun as he cut down the last of them, his suit stained with their blood. The doors slid open. Varkish stood at the center of the room, calm and composed despite the chaos outside. His golden armor gleamed, and his eyes burned with hatred. "You've fought well, human," he said, "but it's over. Surrender, and I may spare your kind." Da-hyun raised his rifle. "We don't surrender." They clashed. Varkish was fast, his blade a blur of deadly light. But Da-hyun was faster. Every step, every strike, was fueled by loss, by Jiwoo's sacrifice, by So Min's death, by every friend he'd lost in this war. Varkish stumbled back, bleeding, his sneer twisted into desperation. You're savages. Animals. Dahyun's voice was cold and steady. We fight to survive. You fight to dominate. That's why you lost. He pulled the trigger. The war ended with a single shot 6. The Xoveri Empire's retreat was not an organized withdrawal. It was a flight of desperation and fear. Their once mighty fleet, battered and broken, limped away from Earth's orbit like wounded animals. The terrifying silence of human warfare had shattered their arrogance. The message was clear. Humanity was not prey. They were predators. As the last enemy ship disappeared into the blackness of space, the battered remains of Earth's defense forces let out a quiet, exhausted cheer. But there was little celebration. The cost had been too high. Entire cities lay in ruin. The air was filled with the acrid scent of destruction, and the stars above still flickered with the light of burning ships. Dahyun stood on a ridge overlooking what had once been a thriving metropolis, now reduced to ash and twisted steel. His face was a mask of exhaustion, but his eyes remained hard. The weight of every sacrifice, every life lost, pressed down on his shoulders. Yet there was no room for despair, only resolve. Days later, the memorial was held. Thousands gathered in the shadow of the broken skyline, their faces solemn and their hearts heavy. The air was thick with the murmurs of grieving families, with the weight of loss and the quiet strength of survival. Rows of holographic displays flickered to life, each bearing the name and face of someone who had given their life for humanity's survival. Jiwoo's face was among them. So was Hyunwoo's. So was So Min's. When Dahyun stepped forward to speak, the crowd fell silent. His voice was rough, not from weariness, but from emotion held back. "We never wanted this war," he began, his words slow and deliberate. "We never asked for it. The Xoveri came to our home believing they would crush us without resistance, that we would fall like every other species they've conquered." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. But they were wrong. A murmur rippled through the crowd, not of fear, but of quiet, burning pride. "They called us savages," Dahyun continued. "They called us weak. But when their ships fell from the sky and their soldiers refused to advance, they learned the truth. We don't fight for conquest. We fight for survival. We fight for each other, and when someone threatens our home," his voice hardened, his eyes blazing, "we make sure they never leave." The crowd erupted into cheers, not of triumph, but of defiance. The message was clear. Humanity would never be anyone's victim. Across the galaxy, that message spread like wildfire. The survivors of the Xoveri fleet whispered of Earth's terrifying resistance, of an enemy that fought like ghosts and struck without mercy. They spoke of cloaked warriors, of unstoppable drones, and of a people who would rather burn their own cities than submit. For the first time in its history, the galaxy looked at humanity with fear and respect.